What is up, everybody? And today we're going to be talking about macros and how we utilize them for energy. So before I even begin talking about macros, I just want to establish that I am not a doctor, I am not a scientist, I'm more of a bodybuilder that understand the basic concepts of what we need to know in order to progress in our fitness journey. First off, what are macros? Macros are fats, carbs, and protein, and together they make up calories. So what macros are is that they are components of calories, and each three of these macros have their own individual roles, but they are all utilized as a source of energy in some shape or form. So first, let's talk about our primary source of energy, which is carbohydrates. So how do our body uses carbohydrates as energy? So let's say that you had some carbohydrates inside of your body, right? Inside of your glycogen. Glycogen is basically another word for a bank of carbohydrates. So your muscle has glycogen, your shoulder has glycogen, right? Everywhere has glycogen, and pretty much glucose, which is basically carbohydrate that has been broken down. Glucose is what we use for energy, right? In order to do stuff. Carbohydrates inside of our glycogen and liver gets converted into glucose into our bloodstream so we can utilize it for energy. That's how we use carbs for energy. That right there is through a process called glycolysis. Glycolysis is when you're utilizing the glucose inside of your glycogen and using it for energy. So when we eat a carbohydrate meal, we don't use that source of energy ASAP for our needs. What we actually do is that when we eat a carbohydrate meal, whatever we ate prior to that meal, the carbohydrate that's already inside of our glycogen, right? We're utilizing that as fuel. And pretty much the meal that you're eating right now, right? That's going through a process called glucogenesis. Pretty much what that is carbs that's inside the bloodstream into your glycogen, right? Once it gets into your glycogen, now your body can utilize the carbohydrates that's inside your glycogen and use it to energy. That's called glycolysis. So pretty much when you eat a carbohydrate meal, it goes through glucogenesis, and then it goes through glycolysis. So eat, stored, and then used as energy. That right there is carbohydrates in a nutshell, how we use it as energy. Now let's talk about fats. Fats mainly are for our health benefits, right? You guys heard of the terms omega-3 fatty acids, right? And essential fatty acids. These are pretty much just what our body needs for health-wise issues. But you can also utilize fats as energy, and there's two ways that I see it. So the first way is by doing aerobic exercises like cardio, jogging, very low intensity stuff that doesn't require bursts, just slow, steady, and you're doing it for a long period of time. I believe that to enter a aerobic state, right, it takes a couple of minutes to enter it too, so your body could easily shift to utilize fats as the main source of energy. So the reason why aerobic exercises prefer fats as the source of energy, right, is because aerobic requires oxygen. So fats actually require oxygen in order to be used as energy. And anaerobic exercises, right, do not require oxygen. So this goes back to carbohydrates. Because carbohydrates don't require oxygen to be utilized, they are an anaerobic exercise, like bursts, liftings, because when you lift and you do all this heavy stuff for a short amount of time, you don't require oxygen. Alright, you guys, so that's the first way that we use fats as energy. So now the second way that we can use fats as energy is by switching our diet. So for instance, what if we've taken out carbohydrates, right? Our primary source of fuel, we've taken it out, and then we no longer can't use the process of glycolysis, right? Glucose to energy. We can't do that. And the reason why we can't do that is simply because we don't have any carbohydrates present. If you're doing it correctly, right, you can actually bounce into a state called ketosis. That is when your fats are the next source of energy, and that is through a process called ketogenesis. It's kind of similar. So when you are in a ketogenesis state, that is when you are utilizing fats, right? Fats, as in we have unlimited amount of fat storage, just unlimited amount of fat storage. That's why the keto diet is amazing, because it spares more muscle tissue like that. Because we have an unlimited amount of fat storage, that means that we're more protein sparing and we're able to survive longer. But this will only work if you are actually in a ketosis state, if you're very keto adapted. So this might happen after, 2 weeks or 3 weeks of going no carbs. Your body has to actually adapt itself into ketosis. But that right there is the second way how we use fats as energy, is to get your body into a ketogenic state. Alright guys, now we are at the very last macro. We are at protein. So protein, we all know that we use that to repair our muscles and to recover, right? That's what protein does. That's what it is. That's the role of amino acids. Amino acids are basically what proteins are, what they are broken down to. For carbohydrates, they are broken down to glucose. For fats, they are broken down to fatty acids or either ketones. And for protein, they are broken down into amino acids. So here's the very interesting thing about protein, is that protein can actually be converted into an energy source as well. And what type of energy source can it be converted into? When your body is scarce of carbohydrates, right? Or if you're eating too much protein, so too little of carbohydrates or too much protein, it can actually go through the process of gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis is when your amino acids inside of your body is turned into glucose to be utilized as fuel. Technically, you're not utilizing protein as energy. It's a converting type of thing. You're converting it into a source of energy, remember, which is glucose. And so that source of energy can be used through glycolysis. Pretty cool, right? So I'm gonna take it back again. When we are scarce of carbohydrates, right? Or when we are eating too much protein, our protein can be broken down into glucose, right? And through that process, which remember is called gluconeogenesis, is now a glucose. And because it is a glucose now, and it's in our bloodstream, it could either go through the process of glucogenesis or glycolysis. It could be stored into like glycogen, or it could be used as glycolysis and literally be used as a source of energy through carbs. So now here's the confusing thing. I thought you said that when you were scarce of carbohydrates, you go into keto, you don't really go into gluconeogenesis. Now, here's the thing. When you are converting into keto, right? Some people, when they convert into keto and they cut their carbs drastically, and so what happens next is that because they are not keto adapted, their body has not been adapted into a ketosis state yet to utilize ketones as energy, because it takes a very long time for your body to do that. In order to do that, you have to slowly cut your carbs so you can slowly increase your capability of handling ketones. So what happened is that if we have a guy that's eating 300 grams of carbs and we cut his carbs out completely the next day, right? Yes, he's gonna go through a little bit of ketosis and a little bit of gluconeogenesis. It's kind of bro science, but that's just how it is because he's not keto adapted, right? He's going through a unbalanced fluctuation of energy. Now, what if we had a guy that has been eating low carbs for like 2 weeks now, right? 2 weeks, and we cut out his carbs completely, but because he's only like, for example, maybe 40 grams of carbs, right, for 2 weeks now, okay? Now, what he's gonna be primarily using for the next source of energy, if he was to cut out carbs completely, is ketosis. Because he is so low of carbs, he's already that much keto adapted because of his low carb state for a long time now, right? For 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks, he's been adapting into a ketosis state just enough so when he cut out carbs completely, his body will readily prefer ketones as the main source of energy. So that's the first way that we use protein for energy, is when we are scarce of carbs and we could either go through gluconeogenesis or ketosis based off of someone's diet, right? Now, what if we have too much protein, right? That's the second way that protein can be utilized as energy. What if we have too much protein? This is basically for the people that eats, whatever they want, and their protein is like so freaking high, right? Let's say they're like 150 pounds and they eat like 200 grams of protein. That excess amount of protein is going to be converted into glucose if his body needs the glucose, or it could be converted into fat, and that's the process called lipogenesis. So yeah, pretty cool, right? So when you're eating too much protein, right, and depending on the situation that you are in, right, if you are in a caloric deficit but eating too much protein, then you are actually turning it into a carbohydrate. But let's say if you're on a caloric maintenance and a caloric surplus, right, you're on a bulk, you're eating a lot of protein, you pretty much already have so much carbohydrate because you are eating a lot of calories already, right? You're gonna be turning that protein into a fat, remember, which is lipogenesis. These long words, right, like glycolysis, glucogenesis, lipogenesis, ketosis, these are all just fancy words, you guys. These are just, stuff to like fats to ketones, carbs to energy, carbs to glycogen. Like, I just want you guys to understand what these words are because, they have a name for them, and then it's just important to have a name. I'm not a science dude. I don't know anything about like the deep detailed cellular respiration, which is basically in detailed context. I just know the simple basics. So here's the macro breakdown to macros converting to each other, because macros are able to convert into each other because our body is like a survival mechanism and it has to do what it has to do in order to survive. So for carbohydrate, it can be used as an energy source, or too much it could be converted into a fat, right? For a fat could be also turned into a source of energy, right, which is ketones, or it can just play its primary role for health. Now, the interesting thing about protein is that a fat and a carb cannot be turned into protein. That's why protein is extremely important. If you lack on protein on your diet, you're going to be lacking on your fitness journey. If you're trying to build muscle, if you're trying to lose weight while maintaining muscle, you need protein. I hope you guys find this very informative. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, you guys. It will mean a lot to me. It will help me out more. And turn on notifications so y'all can never miss out on aesthetic content. Oh, and why should you believe me? Well, because I am aesthetic. Legs. So if you don't believe me, you never understand macros.